With the release of Boruto to Blue Vortex, the main talking point of the chapter was Kurama coming back. And to say that this caused some controversy in the fandom would be an understatement. But does Kurama coming back now mean that Kijimoto is a bad writer? The simple answer is no, and I will be breaking down how this has actually been foreshadowed all throughout Boruto. The first main instance of foreshadowing occurred during the fight against Momoshiki in chapter 7, when Momoshiki says, "What a pity, Fox, that you possess so much power, yet not the jutsu to pass it down to the next generation." Then he proceeds to show Kurama/Naruto how it is done by turning Kinshiki into a chakra fruit and eating him, where he now had the power that Kinshiki possessed. So after reading this, there are usually two camps. Those who say that Kurama coming back contradicts what Momoshiki says, and those who say that this is not foreshadowing. So let's tackle the first one. That has to do with Kurama coming back and it contradicting what Momoshiki says. First of all, the way that Momoshiki confirms to himself that Kurama doesn't possess the jutsu necessary to pass down his chakra to the next generation is after checking Boruto using his Byakugan. In that moment, not only did he have access to Boruto's fate to some level, but he also confirmed to himself that Boruto doesn't have Kurama's powers. Momoshiki is able to tell to some extent if somebody has Kurama's powers or at least tell Beast's powers by using his Byakugan. This is seen in chapter 4 when Momoshiki uses his Byakugan to look inside Naruto and see that he possesses the Fox's powers, which basically is Kurama's powers. This is why in the beginning I say that Momoshiki was referring to Kurama being able to pass down his powers and not Naruto, because those powers that Momoshiki was looking at in chapter 4 and in chapter 7 actually was Kurama's powers, which is why he referred to it as the Fox. So, rather than confirming that Kurama doesn't have the jutsus to transfer his power to the next generation, it confirms that Kurama didn't pass down his powers to Boruto. What Momoshiki is saying is the conclusion of him not seeing Kurama's powers in Boruto. And the conclusion for Momoshiki is that Kurama doesn't have the jutsu to pass down his powers. Now, if you take into account that the conclusion that Momoshiki has is not a fact, but simply him forming a conclusion based on facts that he has seen, you would now be able to see that this is actually foreshadowing to some extent, as Momoshiki doesn't actually know whether or not Kurama has the jutsu to pass down his powers to the next generation. He simply says that he didn't do so. Now, since we can currently see that somehow Himawari has Kurama's powers, or at least the Nine Tails Beast powers, you would be able to see that what Momoshiki comes to the conclusion to is false. And thus, this would be a perfect example of foreshadowing. This now leads us perfectly onto the theory that Kurama, maybe after he was inspired by Momoshiki, or maybe not, was able to find a jutsu to pass down his powers to the next generation. We know that Momoshiki may have had an influence in inspiring Kurama to find a jutsu to pass down his powers, as we have a lot of information to prove that Kurama is aware of everything while he is in Naruto's body. This can be seen with Kawaki. Not only was he able to have access to all the same information that Naruto had access to regarding Kawaki, but he was also able to physically interact with Kawaki while Naruto was sleeping, which is where all the theories of Kurama learning about nuclear fusion while Naruto was sleeping actually comes from. So, it is not out of the blue for Kurama to have some spare time to either pass down his powers to Himawari or figure out a way to do so. But now, the next point that people would bring up is the fact that Shinobi, especially those in the sensory team, were not able to detect Kurama's powers. But there are multiple ways one can answer this question. And to this, I would say that there are multiple ways that we could answer this question. But one point I have to stress is that baby Kurama himself hints towards the revelation that this entire time, or at least after he was no longer in Naruto's body, he started to hide his chakra signal after he now appeared in Himawari's body. as he says, "I can't believe that Jerk Ten-Tails would sniff me out." This implies that to some degree, Kurama was hiding his chakra signal, which would now explain why the sensory team was not able to sense that Himawari had baby Kurama inside of him, because Kurama was hiding his chakra signal this entire time. A lot of people like to point out that Ayo, somebody in the sensory team, was able to see that Ginkaku and Kinkaku had Kurama's chakra. So why were other people who were in the Leaf sensory team were able to figure that out? It didn't make sense to some people, but after figuring out that Kurama was hiding his chakra signal, this makes perfect sense. But even though he was doing that, some people were still able to sense that chakra, and that was Damien and Jiro, who were able to sense that Himawari had power inside of her.